When I was in 8th grade, my friends and I decided to have a sleepover at my friend Jack's house, but instead of staying inside, we thought it would be more fun to camp out in his backyard. Jack had a big yard with plenty of space, and his parents were fine with the idea as long as we stayed close to the house. We were excited about the adventure, not knowing that it would turn into a night we'd never forget. Jack, Mike, Tom, and I spent the afternoon setting up a large, old tent that Jack's family had used on camping trips. It was big enough to fit all 4 of us comfortably, with room for our sleeping bags, snacks, and flashlights. Once the tent was up, we gathered firewood and made a small fire pit a safe distance away from the tent. As the sun began to set, we roasted marshmallows and told ghost stories, each one trying to outscare the others. The yard was surrounded by thick woods, and as night fell, the darkness seemed to swallow everything beyond the flickering light of our campfire. We heard the usual sounds of the forest: crickets chirping, frogs croaking, and the occasional rustle of leaves. It was peaceful at first, but as the stories got scarier, the sounds of the night started to feel more sinister. Around 1 o'clock in the morning, the fire began to die down, and we decided to call it a night. We crawled into the tent, zipped up the door, and settled into our sleeping bags. Jack's parents had left the back porch light on, casting a dim glow over the yard, but the inside of the tent was pitch black. We talked for a while, laughing and joking, until one by one we started to drift off to sleep. I'm not sure how long I had been asleep when I was jolted awake by a noise outside the tent. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate, crunching on the leaves and twigs. My heart started to race as I listened, hoping it was just one of the guys going to the bathroom. But when I looked around, I saw that everyone was still in their sleeping bags. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Yeah," Mike replied, his eyes wide with fear. "What do you think it is?" We all listened in silence, the footsteps growing closer. They stopped right outside the tent, and we heard a soft, scratching noise on the fabric. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could hear the others' breathing quicken. "Maybe it's a raccoon or something," Jack suggested, trying to sound courageous, but we all knew he was just as scared as the rest of us. "Should we check it out?" Tom asked, his voice barely a whisper. Before anyone could answer, the scratching stopped and the footsteps moved away, disappearing into the woods. We let out a collective sigh of relief, but none of us could shake the feeling of dread. We decided to stay awake for a while, just in case whatever it was came back. Just as we were starting to relax, we heard the footsteps again, this time circling the tent. The noise was louder, more insistent, and the scratching returned, more aggressive than before. We huddled together in the center of the tent, our flashlights flickering on and off as we tried to make sense of what was happening. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped, and there was an eerie silence. We held our breath, straining to hear any sound. Then, out of nowhere, the tent started shaking violently, as if someone or something was trying to rip it apart. We screamed, our flashlights casting wild shadows on the walls of the tent. "Run!" Jack shouted, unzipping the tent door and bolting out into the yard. We followed, stumbling over our sleeping bags and each other in our haste to escape. Outside, the porch light illuminated the yard, but there was no sign of anyone or anything. That is, until I saw it. A group of about 5 people, all dressed in hooded garments, standing behind the tent. We ran to the back door of the house, pounding on it until Jack's parents let us in. We told them what had happened, our voices shaking with fear. They reassured us that no one lived around there, but agreed to check the yard with us. Armed with flashlights and a baseball bat, we ventured back into the yard. The tent was still standing, though it looked a bit worse for wear. We searched the area but found no tracks, no signs of any intruder. The woods were silent, almost too silent, as if holding their breath. Jack's parents suggested we spend the rest of the night inside, and we didn't argue. We gathered our things and moved into the living room, huddling together on the floor. Sleep was out of the question. Every noise made us jump, our imaginations running wild with possibilities. The next morning, we went back outside to inspect the tent in the daylight. To our surprise, we found deep scratch marks on the fabric, as if something sharp had tried to tear its way in. We also saw cigarette butts on the edge of the lawn near the tent. We never figured out who those people were or what they had in mind that night, but the experience left us shaken. Each of us convinced it had been something more than just a prank. The memory of that night haunted us for a long time, and we never attempted another backyard campout. The woods behind Jack's house remained a place of mystery and fear, a reminder of a sleepover that went terrifyingly wrong. When my best friend Natalie invited me to spend the weekend with her at her grandparents' house, I jumped at the chance. Her family traveled a lot, and this time, they invited me to go with them out of town. The idea of a quiet weekend in a small town seemed perfect. Natalie's grandparents lived in an old house outside of the city, a place she said was full of character and history. Little did I know, it was also full of something else. We arrived late Friday afternoon, welcomed by Natalie's grandmother and grandfather. They were kind and hospitable, instantly making me feel at home. After some lively conversation in the living room and a delicious dinner, it was time for bed. Natalie and I were to sleep in the guest room, which happened to be the same room her grandmother slept in. The room was small but cozy, with a large bed for us and a smaller bed for her grandmother. As we got ready for bed, Natalie confided in me. "This house always creeps me out a bit. Do you mind if I sleep with Grandma tonight?" Her request startled me. If Natalie, who had been here countless times, felt uneasy, what did that mean for me? But I shrugged it off and assured her it was fine. We turned off the lights and the room was bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight streaming through the curtains. Natalie climbed into bed with her grandmother, and I settled into the large bed by myself. I lay there for a while, listening to the house settle, its old bones creaking and groaning. Eventually, I began to drift off. Suddenly, I felt a tug on my covers. They slipped off my neck to my mid-arm. Alarmed, I opened my eyes and glanced around. The room was still and quiet. I pulled the covers back up and tried to fall asleep again. Moments later, the covers were pulled down again, this time to my midsection. My heart pounded in my chest. I sat up, peering through the dim light. Natalie was sound asleep with her grandmother, the moonlight revealing their peaceful faces. Trembling, I lay back down and pulled the covers over myself once more, determined to ignore whatever was happening. Then the covers were yanked off completely. I froze in fear, unable to move or make a sound. My throat felt tight, and when I finally managed to call out, my voice came out as a raspy whisper. "Help me." No one stirred. The room remained silent. Panic set in. I knew I had to get out of the bed. Summoning every ounce of courage, I leapt off the bed and darted to the bathroom. I locked the door behind me, sinking to the floor in a flood of tears and terror. I stayed there for what felt like an hour, too scared to move. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I knew I had to return to the bed. I unlocked the bathroom door and crept back to the room. The covers lay in a heap on the floor. I climbed back into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin, and somehow, despite my fear, I fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up to an empty room. The sunlight streamed through the window, dispelling the shadows of the night before. I was the last one to wake. I quickly dressed and headed to the kitchen, following the sound of voices and laughter. Everyone was there, talking and eating breakfast. When I walked in, Natalie's grandfather looked up and asked, "Are you okay?" Confused, I replied, "Why?" He then said something that gave me goosebumps. "You were up all night calling for help. We were worried about you." My mind raced. If they heard me, why didn't they come to my aid? I felt a mix of shame and confusion. I don't remember," I stammered. But deep down, I knew I hadn't imagined it. The terror I felt was real, and their indifference puzzled me. For the rest of the weekend, I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone sinister lingered in that house. Natalie seemed oblivious to my unease, and I didn't want to ruin her time with her grandparents by bringing up my fears. But the memory of that night stayed with me long after we left, a haunting reminder that some places hold secrets best left undisturbed. As I look back, I still question my sanity. Did I imagine the whole thing? Or was there truly someone or something malevolent in that room? I'll never know for sure, but one thing is certain. I won't be spending another night in that house again. This story was discovered as a letter to an editor at a local newspaper, Hoyle Shoemaker, Bamberg, South Carolina, December 23, 1901, to Mr. L.M. Schotter, Bamberg Herald. Dear Sir, the following is the story you requested regarding my experience we discussed in town yesterday. The year was 1899, and darkness was a mantle that draped the countryside with an uneasy stillness. I was making my long trek back home from the town market, my path illuminated only by the dim glow of a lantern and the occasional flicker of starlight piercing the canopy of trees. That evening, a hint of adventure whispered in the air, compelling me to take a supposed shortcut I'd heard whispers about but never dared to try. This side path, less trodden and thick with overgrowth, promised a quicker route home. Curiosity, as much as the desire to shorten my journey, nudged me forward. As I ventured deeper, the woods grew denser, the path narrower, and an eerie silence settled around me, broken only by the crunch of my boots on the dry leaves. After what felt like hours rather than the promised shortened time, a glimmer of light through the trees caught my desperate attention. I approached cautiously, finding a large, tattered house that looked as though it had been clawed out of a nightmare. It was dilapidated, with shuttered windows and a crooked chimney from which smoke lazily curled. As I stood there contemplating my next move, the door creaked open, revealing two figures. One was a tall, gaunt man with a beard that seemed to catch the shadows, and the other a stout woman with eyes too bright for the dim light. "Lost your way, traveler?" the man asked, his voice smooth like oil on water. "Aye. Thought this path would lead me home quicker," I replied, clutching my lantern a bit tighter. "Why don't you come in for a bit? Have some warm tea before you brave the night again," the woman suggested with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Something in my gut screamed that this was wrong. The isolation of their home, the way the light seemed to avoid touching it fully, and the too keen glint in their eyes. "Thank you, but I must be getting on," I managed to say, stepping back towards the woods. "There's no path around here, lad. Come in, we insist," the man said, his tone hardening, stepping towards me. I turned and fled into the woods, hearing their footsteps pounding behind me. Panic lent speed to my legs as branches whipped past, tearing at my clothes and skin. In my frantic escape, the ground suddenly gave way beneath me, and I tumbled into darkness. I lay there for a moment, my body aching and cold, before noticing a putrid smell. Horror gripped me as I realized I was lying atop a pile of bodies, their stages of decay varying from fresh to barely recognizable. I retched, the reality settling in like a cloak of terror. Somehow, I climbed out, driven by sheer survival instinct. I ran without direction until rough hands grabbed me, dragging me back to that nightmare house. The couple bound me with coarse rope, throwing me into their cellar, a dark hole that reeked of mold and worse. Hours passed, or perhaps it was days. Time lost all meaning in that dark place. Despair nearly consumed me, until a faint glow from above stirred some sliver of hope. Smoke began to seep into the cellar, carrying the distinct crackle of fire. The house was burning. Summoning every ounce of strength and desperation, I writhed and twisted, the ropes cutting into my skin until miraculously they loosened. I clawed my way up the cellar stairs, the structure around me groaning and spitting flames. The fire was a ravenous beast, consuming everything in its path. I burst out into the night, the cool air a shocking contrast to the heat behind me. The house was an inferno, a pyre that lit up the night. I didn't stop to look for the sinister couple. My only thought was escape. By the grace of some divine providence, I found my way back to the road by the light of the burning house. My home, when it finally came into view, never looked more welcoming. I learned later that the couple was known to the local authorities, suspected for a string of disappearances but never caught. Their deaths were a mystery to the town, the fire deemed an accident, though I knew better. As I write this, recalling that night still affects my sanity. The road less traveled, I learned, is less traveled for a reason, and sometimes the darkness hides more than just shadows. Very truly yours, Hoyle Shoemaker. The following is from stationery found in someone's old family archives. It is a letter written from a John Tapscott to a family member known only as Norman. Dear Norman, I must tell you of an incident that occurred yesterday, February 7th. I may be forever distraught by the events of this day. The chill of the night was biting as I guided my buckboard wagon down the rutted path leading away from town. It had been a successful trip, but dusk was deepening into an inky blackness, urging me to quicken my pace. My horses, sensing my urgency, tossed their heads and whinnied softly, their breath clouding in the cold air. The road was familiar, a path I had traversed countless times, yet tonight it seemed cloaked in a peculiar, unsettling silence. Suddenly a rabbit darted from the underbrush, spooking the horses. They reared up, nearly tipping the wagon before bolting down an unfamiliar path. My heart pounded in my ears as I struggled to regain control, shouting and pulling hard on the reins. After what felt like a lifetime, the horses calmed and the wagon rolled to a stop beneath the looming boughs of ancient oaks. I sat for a moment, collecting my thoughts, the only sounds being my labored breathing and the horses' snorts of distress. Then, slicing through the night stillness, came a distant scream, a human scream, twisted with fear and agony. My eyes widened and my body shivered. Compelled by a mix of fear and concern, I grabbed a lantern and ventured towards the source. The trees seemed to close in around me as I walked, the ground soft and uneven underfoot. As I crept closer, another scream rent the air. More desperate than the last. I quickened my pace, heart hammering against my ribs. Emerging into a clearing, I beheld a sight that stopped me dead. A group of figures, clad in robes and grotesque animal masks, stood around a bound figure. Torches in their hands cast flickering shadows and painted the scene with an otherworldly glow. One of the figures raised a knife, its blade catching the torchlight as he began chanting in a guttural tongue. They hadn't noticed me yet. I was about to retreat when a twig snapped under my foot. Heads turned, eyes glinting behind masks. The chanting stopped. Panic gripped me, and I turned and ran back to my wagon, the echoes of their sudden, savage shouts spurring my frantic escape. As I reached my wagon, I unleashed the horses and leaped onto the driver's seat, whipping the reins fiercely. The wagon lurched forward just as the masked figures emerged from the woods, mounting their own horses to give chase. My heart was a drumbeat in my ears, the wagon wheels thundering against the ground. Just as they gained on me, shadows emerged from the opposite side of the road. A lynch mob, their faces twisted in rage, armed with guns and shouting curses. They hadn't come for me. They had come for the masked figures. Gunfire erupted, the night exploding with the sounds of chaos. I didn't look back, focusing only on the path ahead, urging the horses to their limit. By the time I reached the safety of my homestead, dawn was breaking, casting a pale light over the land. I was safe, but seriously troubled. The images, smells, and sounds of the night's horrors replaying in my mind. The next morning, the local newspaper confirmed my fears. The ritual had been interrupted by townsfolk who had suspected the group of foul play for months. Some of the masked group were apprehended, others lay dead. The article hinted at dark practices and missing persons, a sinister undercurrent that had run through the town unnoticed until now. As I set the paper down, I shivered, despite the morning sun streaming through the window. Last night, I had come perilously close to an unholy evil that prowled beneath the surface of our quiet community. I was safe, yes, but forever changed by the knowledge of what lies in wait when the sun goes down. Truly yours, John Tapscott, February 8th, 1899. My name is Tony, and I'm writing this from prison. I've been here for over a year now, and I still can't shake the memories of that night. It was the night my life changed forever. It was the night I learned what real fear was. My friend Mike and I decided to rob a house. We had heard about a big old Victorian-style home out in the middle of nowhere. We thought it would be easy. We were wrong. We waited until 2 in the morning, thinking everyone would be asleep. We broke in through a window and got in that way. The house was dark and silent, but there was a stench we couldn't identify. It was foul and made my stomach turn. We started grabbing whatever we could find of value. But as we moved through the house, that stench got worse. It was like something was rotting, but we couldn't pinpoint the source. Mike and I exchanged uneasy glances, but kept going. We were in one of the downstairs rooms when it happened. Mike was suddenly yanked into the air, hanging upside down from the ceiling. I barely had time to react before I stepped into a trap myself. A rope snared my leg, and I was pulled up next to him. We dangled there from the 12-foot ceiling, struggling to free ourselves. A light flicked on, blinding us for a moment. When my eyes adjusted, I saw the homeowner standing in the doorway. He was a huge, hairy man with a wild look in his eyes. He smirked and said, "Well, what do we have here?" We didn't respond, just kept struggling to free ourselves. The homeowner watched us for a moment, then called out, "Binky!" From the shadows emerged a Bengal tiger, its eyes gleaming in the dim light. My heart nearly stopped. Mike and I froze, terrified. The homeowner walked over and cut Mike's rope. Mike fell to the ground with a thud. The tiger pounced on him, sinking its teeth into his leg and dragging him towards another room. Mike's screams of pain and terror echoed through the house. I could only watch in horror, unable to do anything. But then something changed. The tiger roared in pain, a sound that chilled me to the bone. The homeowner shouted, "Binky!" and ran after the tiger. Mike had managed to pull out his knife and stabbed the tiger in the eye. The beast was thrashing around and the homeowner was trying to control it. While they were distracted, I managed to free myself from the rope trap. I grabbed the closest thing I could find, a fire poker, and crept towards the room where the commotion was. I could hear Mike's groans of pain and the tiger's angry growls. I rounded the corner and saw the homeowner struggling with the injured tiger. With all the strength I could muster, I swung the fire poker and hit the homeowner hard. He stumbled, and I grabbed Mike, helping him to his feet. We ran out of the house as fast as we could, the screams and growls fading behind us. We drove to the nearest hospital, Mike bleeding badly from his leg. After he was treated, we called the police and told them everything. They thought we were lying, but we convinced them to go to the house. When we got back to the house with the police, they used a megaphone to call the homeowner out. The door opened, and instead of coming out himself, he released the tiger. The beast charged at the police, and they opened fire, killing it instantly. The homeowner, horrified and enraged, charged at the police himself. They had no choice but to shoot him too. He fell to the ground, lifeless. Even though we told the police everything, Mike and I were still arrested. We were charged with home invasion, theft, and breaking and entering. Now, I sit in this cell, replaying that night over and over in my head. The stench, the traps, the tiger, the screams. I never thought my life would turn out like this. I never imagined I'd end up in prison, scarred by a night of horror. But here I am, paying for my mistakes. If I could go back, I'd do things differently. I'd never set foot in that house. But it's too late for regrets. Now all I can do is serve my time and hope that one day I'll find a way to move on from that nightmare. I often think about Mike. He survived, but he's in another prison, serving his own sentence. We haven't spoken since that night. I think about the homeowner sometimes. Who was he? Why did he have those traps, that tiger? The police never found out much about him. He had no family, no friends, no history that anyone could uncover. It's like he appeared out of nowhere, a monster hidden in plain sight. So, this is my story. It's not a happy one, but it's mine. It's a story of fear, regret, and survival. It's a story of a night that changed everything, and it's a story I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. I've been sitting in this cell for 2 years now, staring at the same gray walls, counting the days. My name is Rick, and I'm a thief. But I swear, what I'm in here for is not what I did. Let me tell you my story, and maybe, just maybe, someone will believe me. It was a stormy night, the kind where the rain pelts down like it's trying to wash the world away. I had just broken out of prison and was desperate, hungry, and soaked to the bone. I needed money and shelter fast. So I did what I knew best. I broke into a house. I wasn't planning to hurt anyone, just grab what I could and get out. I picked a big house on the edge of town, hoping the rich folks were away. The storm made it easy to sneak in, covering the sound of my breaking the window. I slipped inside, my heart racing, ready to loot. But as soon as I stepped into the dark living room, I heard something that froze me in my tracks. A muffled scream. I followed the sound, creeping down the hallway. The house was big, and the storm made everything eerie. I moved towards the sound, and as I got closer, the screams turned into sobs. My gut twisted. I wasn't prepared for what I was about to see. In the master bedroom, I saw a man. He was big, wearing a ski mask, and had a woman tied up on the bed. She was crying, struggling, her eyes wide with terror. The man was fumbling with something in his bag, and I knew I had to act fast. Without thinking, I lunged at him. We struggled, crashing into furniture, knocking over a lamp. The woman screamed louder. In the chaos, she got knocked unconscious. The guy managed to stab me with a knife he pulled from his bag. The pain was intense, but I didn't stop. I fought harder, trying to save her, but he was too strong. He stabbed me again and again, and I could feel my strength leaving me. Blood was everywhere, and I was slipping. In a final desperate move, I grabbed his knife hand and twisted, but he broke free and ran out of the house, leaving me to bleed out on the floor. The next thing I knew, the police were there. They found me covered in blood, the woman unconscious and tied up. I tried to tell them what happened, but they didn't believe me. They concluded that I had a partner who stabbed me and fled the scene. To them, I was just a convict, a thief caught in the act. They arrested me, slapped the cuffs on me while I was still bleeding. I was taken to the hospital, patched up, and then straight to jail. They charged me with assault, attempted rape, and breaking and entering. The woman, poor thing, had a serious head injury and couldn't remember a thing. She couldn't testify for or against me. The evidence was stacked against my favor. My fingerprints were all over the scene, and I had a record. The jury didn't take long to convict me. Now here I am, back in prison, this time for something I didn't do. I see the same walls every day, the same faces. Some nights, I lie awake, thinking about that woman, hoping she's okay. I wonder if she'll ever remember what really happened, if she'll ever come forward to clear my name. I replay that night over and over in my head. If only I had stayed put. If only I hadn't tried to play the hero. But I couldn't just stand by and let that monster hurt her. It was the right thing to do, even if it cost me my freedom. This place, San Quentin, it's a living hell. The guards don't care about our stories. To them, we're all guilty. The other inmates, they don't believe me either. They think I'm just another predator who got what he deserved. It's lonely in here knowing the truth and having no one to believe you. I spend my days writing letters to anyone who might listen, trying to get someone to reopen my case. No one writes back. I can't give up. I have to keep trying, for my own sanity. I'm not a hero. I'm just a thief who tried to do the right thing. I've tried to contact the woman to see if she's remembered anything, but my letters go unanswered. I don't blame her. She's been through hell, just like me. But I hope one day she'll remember, that she'll come forward and tell the truth. It's my only hope of getting out of here. The rain pelted the windshield, making a rhythmic sound that was almost mesmerizing. My hands clenched the steering wheel as I drove through the heavy rain. It was way past midnight and the storm had turned the night pitch black. I was driving with my friend, Tanisha. We had just left a movie night at a friend's house and I was dropping her off at her apartment. "Can you believe this rain?" Tanisha remarked, staring out at the storm. "It feels like the sky just opened up." "Yeah, it's wild," I answered, barely able to hear my own voice over the rain. We'd been driving for about 15 minutes when I noticed a car behind us. It was a sleek black sedan with dark windows, its headlights bright in the darkness. A chill ran through me as the car got really close, almost like it was pushing us. "Is that guy trying to push us off the road?" Tanisha asked, looking worriedly in the side mirror. "I don't know," I said, my heart starting to race. "But I'm not going to let him scare us." I tried to stay focused on driving, but the car kept creeping closer. Panic started to rise as I tried to keep the car steady. "Maybe we should pull over and let him pass," suggested Tanisha, her voice shaky with fear. "No way," I replied firmly, holding the steering wheel tighter. "I'm not stopping for anyone in this storm." But the car didn't back off. It stayed right behind us, its headlights glaring through the darkness. The tension inside the car was mounting, and it felt like we were being chased. Suddenly, the car swerved to the side and pulled up next to us. I glanced over and saw a man driving, his face just a silhouette in the darkness and the tinted windows. He drove aggressively, staring at us with an unsettling focus. "What does he want?" Tanisha whispered, scared. "I don't know," I said, my heart pounding. "But we need to get away from him." I stepped on the gas and our car surged forward. But no matter how fast we went, the black car kept up, staying right beside us. "I think he's trying to kill us," Tanisha yelled, her voice filled with panic. "We gotta lose him," I answered, my hands shaking. "Hold on to your butt." I turned onto a side street, hoping to confuse the black car with a series of turns. But it was no use. The car stayed on our tail, its headlights now turned off. "We need to call the police," Tanisha said, her voice quivering. I nodded and reached for my phone, but my hands were trembling. When I looked, I saw my phone was dead. "Oh no," I muttered, feeling a rush of fear. "My phone's dead." "What do we do now?" Tanisha asked, panic rising in her voice. "I'm not sure," I said, my mind racing. "But if we want to live, we can't let him catch us." I kept driving, pushing the accelerator as hard as I could. The rain got heavier, making it almost impossible to see, but still the car was right on our bumper, black as night. "We need to find a place to hide," Tanisha said urgently. "I'm looking," I replied, scanning for any escape. Then I saw it, a narrow side street leading into deeper darkness. I hit the brakes and turned sharply, tires squealing as we entered the street. The black car followed, but we had a moment's lead. I saw a dead end and floored it towards it. At the last second, I swerved into a narrow alley. The black car tried to follow but couldn't make the turn in time and ended up stuck at the dead end. We stopped the car to catch our breath, and for a brief moment everything was quiet. Then I heard car doors opening and closing. I looked at Tanisha, and she nodded, eyes wide with fear. "Let's get the heck out of here," she said, voice trembling. I agreed, flooring it out of the alley. I hit the gas and didn't look back, leaving the black car and its creepy driver far behind in the night. It was pouring rain, and the heavy sheets of water made it hard to see through my car's headlights. I held tightly as I drove through the storm on a deserted road surrounded by thick forests. It was about 1:30 in the morning, and I had taken a wrong turn, getting lost without any GPS signal to guide me. Suddenly, my car's engine started to sputter and eventually cut off. I pulled over as best I could and tried to start it again, but it wouldn't budge. The rain was pounding on the roof of the car, making a deafening noise in the quiet night. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but I had a terrible signal. With no other choice, I grabbed my coat and umbrella and stepped out into the rain, which soaked me completely within seconds. I could barely see anything as I looked around the dark, dense rural night. I began walking along the empty road, the sound of my footsteps not even audible to me. The only sound was the rain, making the forest seem like it was alive. I tried not to think about the eerie feeling of being watched and kept walking, hoping to find help. After a long while, I saw a van's headlights approaching from behind me. I felt relieved and turned towards it. The van was old and rusty, and inside were a man and a woman in tattered clothes. "Are you okay?" the man shouted over the rain. "My car broke down," I screamed, shivering with cold and relief. "Can you give me a ride to the nearest gas station?" The man looked at the woman and then nodded at me. "Sure, hop in." I hesitated, feeling uneasy, but reminded myself they were my only chance to get out of the storm. I climbed into the back of the dark, musty van, but my unease only grew as we drove. The man and woman kept whispering and glancing at me. Suddenly, the van stopped. The man turned around with a scary smile. "We're here," he said. "Where are we?" I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't answer. He got out and walked around back, opened the doors, and grabbed my arm and pulled me out into the rain. "What are you doing?" I screamed, trying to pull away. The man and woman just laughed, and the man said, "You're not going anywhere. Welcome to your new home. You're ours now," he said menacingly. I started to run, but the woman caught me, and they dragged me deep into the forest. I knew I had to escape soon or I'd be lost forever. Just then, I heard a car approaching. I screamed, and the car stopped. I got away and ran towards the Salvation. A police officer stepped out. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked. I ran towards him, lamenting, "Please help me, they're trying to kill me." "Get in," he screamed. So I gladly jumped into the passenger seat. The officer jumped in, shut his door, and just sat there, staring out at the road through a rain-dropped windshield, the wipers intermittently cutting through the uncomfortable silence. What are we doing? Aren't you going to leave? Or call it in?" Still, he stared. But then he turned his head slowly towards me without a blink, water droplets dripping from his nose. He hissed, "You are not going anywhere." He wrapped his radio cord around my neck, and my first instinct was to poke him in the eyes as hard as I could. He immediately let loose, and I darted out of the car and ran as fast and hard as was possible for me. I then noticed that I was running alongside the road and needed to get to safety fast, as he could recover at any moment. Or what if I run into those other two creeps? Up ahead, I could see that headlights were about to round the corner, and a part of me wanted to risk it and flag this person down. But it being the time of night it was, my instinct kicked in again, and I fled into the woods. There I would remain until morning, where I would eventually catch a ride home, and finally, to safety. In the end, I did file a report, but as of this moment, I have yet to hear anything regarding the incident. Being home alone at night always made me uneasy. The creaks and groans of the old house seemed to come alive, and every shadow held a secret. Yet, I had done it many times before without incident. But this time, something was different. It was around 11:30 p.m. when I arrived home. My parents were out of town for the weekend, leaving me alone in the old creaky house. The wind howled outside, and the branches of the trees scraped against the windows, casting eerie shadows across the room. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease as I settled onto the couch with a book. The TV buzzed softly in the background, the only source of light in the dimly lit room. But no matter how hard I tried to focus on the words on the page, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was letting my fear get the best of me. But then, I heard it. A soft whisper, like someone speaking right into my ear. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, and listened intently. But there was nothing there, just the sound of the wind outside. I tried to brush it off to convince myself that it was just the old house settling. But then I heard it again, the unmistakable sound of footsteps coming from the hallway. I sat frozen, my eyes glued to the doorway, waiting for something to appear. Seconds passed like hours as I sat there, waiting, listening. And then, out of the darkness, a figure emerged. It was a man, tall and slender, with long, unkempt hair that hung in his face. He stood there, staring at me with cold, empty eyes, a twisted smile playing on his lips. I felt a surge of panic rise in my chest as I stumbled to my feet, my heart racing. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice trembling with fear. But the man didn't answer. He just stood there watching me, his eyes filled with a hunger that set my fear to new heights. I backed away slowly, my eyes never leaving his, until I reached the front door. And then I turned and ran, the sound of his laughter echoing in my ears. I ran out into the cold night, my heart thumping. I didn't know where I was going, didn't care. All I knew was that I had to get away from that house, away from that man. I didn't stop running until I reached the nearest neighbor's house, pounding on the door until they let me in. I told them what had happened, but they didn't believe me. They said it was just my imagination, that I had let my fear get the best of me. But I knew what I had seen, knew that it was real. The police were called, but when they arrived, there was no sign of the man, no evidence that he had ever been there. They searched the house from top to bottom, but there was nothing. No trace of the man, no explanation for what had happened. The next day, as I sat in my yard swing, I noticed a white, what seemed to be a grocery bag lying near the woods to my house. I rose and jogged over to the item. Upon opening it, I found several pictures of me in my house, interior and exterior. Pictures of me going and coming, and the scariest image of all was that of me, sleeping in my bed. The wind and snow howled outside, shaking the windows and sending me to the comfort of my covers and hot chocolate. I was curled up on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, watching TV. It was about 2 in the morning, and I was all alone at home. The heavy snowfall had trapped me inside, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. I tried to focus on the movie, but every creak in the house made my mind wander. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination, that there was nothing to be scared of. But as time went on, I felt more and more uneasy. Out of nowhere, there was a knock at the door. I jumped, almost spilling my hot chocolate as my heart skipped a beat. I glanced at the clock. Who could be visiting this late in the middle of a snowstorm? Carefully, I got up from the couch and walked to the door. I peeked through the peephole, but all I could see was the swirling snow outside. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Should I open the door? The knock came again, louder this time, more demanding. Taking a shaky breath, I unlocked the door and opened it just a crack. Standing on the other side was a large man, his face hidden by the falling snow. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The man didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at me with cold, empty eyes. A warning light went off in my mind and I stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest. "Do you need something?" I asked again, my voice shaking with fear. But the man still didn't answer. Instead, he stepped forward, his heavy boots crunching in the snow. I stumbled backward, realizing that something was very wrong. "Hey, I don't know who you are, but you need to leave," I said, trying to sound brave. But the man kept coming, his eyes locked on me with a terrifying intensity. Panicking, I slammed the door shut and locked it, my hands trembling as I backed away. I reached for my phone but remembered that I had left it with the repair shop to fix my cracked screen. Fear washed over me as I realized I was completely cut off from the outside world. I backed away from the door, my eyes glued to it, afraid it might burst open any second. I could hear the man outside, his heavy footsteps crunching in the snow as he paced back and forth. I looked around the room, my mind racing with fear. There had to be something I could do, some way to protect myself. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed a knife, holding it tightly in my shaking hands. I huddled in the corner of the living room, my eyes fixed on the door, waiting for the man to break in. I could hear the man outside, his footsteps getting louder with each passing moment. Suddenly, there was a crash, and the door burst open, sending pieces of wood flying through the air. The man stepped into the room, his eyes locked on me with a terrifying intensity. With a scream, I lunged forward, swinging the knife wildly in front of me. The man stumbled back, his face twisted in anger. But then, to my horror, he lunged forward, grabbing me by the throat and pinning me to the ground. I struggled and fought, but he was too strong. In a panic, I struck out with the knife, the blade sinking into his side. He cried out in pain and stumbled backward, clutching his side. Fueled by adrenaline, I scrambled to my feet and ran for the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I flung it open and stumbled out into the snow, the cold air hitting me like a slap in the face. I ran blindly through the snow, my heart pounding. I had to get away, had to find help before it was too late. I glanced back and saw the man coming out of the house, his eyes still locked on me. Terrified, and just like in the movies, I stumbled and fell, the cold snow soaking through my clothes. I scrambled to my feet and kept running, my lungs burning. I could hear the man behind me, his heavy footsteps crunching in the snow as he chased me. But then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I saw the lights of a car up ahead. With a burst of relief, I ran toward it, screaming for help as loud as I could. The car screeched to a stop and the driver got out, looking concerned. "Are you okay?" he asked. "No, please, you have to help me," I cried, tears streaming down my face. "There's a man. He's trying to..." But before I could finish, the man emerged from the darkness, his eyes still locked on me. To my horror, I realized he wasn't alone. Standing beside him was a woman, her face hidden by the snow. With a surge of terror, I realized they were working together. They had lured me out into the snow, and now they were going to finish what they had started. Panicking, I turned and ran, my heart pounding. The wind howled around me and the snow blinded me, but I kept running, knowing my life depended on it. As I ran, I could hear their laughter echoing in the darkness like a cruel reminder of the storm. I never thought a simple click on Angie's list to find a house painter would unravel my life the way it did. My wife Jenna and I had been planning to repaint our living room for months, and with our anniversary coming up, I wanted everything to be perfect. That's how I found Marissa. Her reviews were stellar and her quote was reasonable. I had no reason to doubt her. Marissa started the job on a sunny Tuesday morning. She was professional, polite, and surprisingly keen on knowing about our lives, which I chalked up to friendly banter. "How long have you and Jenna been married?" she asked as she meticulously mixed her paints. I proudly told her about our 10 years together, our children, and how we still celebrated every anniversary as if it were our first. As the days passed, Marissa worked efficiently, but her questions grew more personal, more probing. It was subtle at first, an innocent question here and there, but soon I realized she always lingered longer than necessary, finding reasons to talk to me about my relationship with Jenna, our past vacations, our home life. One afternoon, I came home early to find Marissa standing in the hallway, not painting, just standing. She was staring at a family photo taken on our last trip to Hawaii. "You must really love your wife," she remarked without turning. Her tone wasn't admiring. It was something else, something I couldn't quite place. "Yes, very much," I replied, a bit taken aback by her intensity. "Marissa, is everything okay with the painting?" She quickly masked her expression and smiled. "Everything's great. I was just taking a little break." But things weren't great. After that day, Marissa's demeanor changed. She started making comments about how lucky Jenna was to have someone like me, how she herself had never been lucky in love. The conversations left me uncomfortable, and I mentioned this to Jenna, who suggested maybe Marissa was just lonely. We decided to give her some space, attributing her behavior to personal struggles. Then one evening things escalated. Jenna and I returned from a dinner date to find Marissa sitting on our front porch. Her work hours were strictly during the day, and she definitely should not have been there at night. Her face was pale, her eyes bright and a little too intense. "Marissa, what are you doing here? Is everything all right?" I asked, my voice laced with concern but also a firm hint that she was out of bounds. She stood up, smoothing her shirt as she did so. "I just needed to finish some touches on the paint. Thought I'd do it now so it's perfect for your anniversary." Her explanation was plausible, yet her presence at night felt invasive. Jenna was more forgiving, thanking Marissa and gently reminding her of work hours. We went inside, unsettled but trying to shake off the discomfort. The real terror began later that night. Jenna and I were asleep when the sound of shattering glass jolted us awake. I rushed downstairs to find our living room window broken and Marissa standing outside, her face twisted in an expression I had never seen before. Rage, desperation, something unhinged. "I can be what she is for you. I can be better," Marissa screamed as I dialed 911. Jenna appeared beside me, her face stricken with fear. Marissa then started to climb in through the window, slashing her hand. She backed off, and with what seemed to be an axe in her hand, she proceeded to the front door where she screamed and chopped at it repeatedly. The police arrived and took Marissa away. She shouted all the while, professing her love for me, claiming she was meant to be the mother of my children, my partner. The scene was surreal, like a nightmare unfolding in the safety of our home. Following that night, Marissa was charged with several aggravated crimes. We obtained a restraining order, but the peace we once took for granted had been shattered. Jenna and I spent many nights talking about how something seemingly so innocent as hiring someone from a reputable service could lead to such terror. The aftermath was a slow recovery, jumping at shadows, startled by any unexpected sounds. Jenna was shaken, always looking over her shoulder, and I was racked with guilt for ever bringing Marissa into our lives. We increased our home security, attended counseling, and gradually reclaimed our sense of safety. Our anniversary that year passed without celebration, overshadowed by the ordeal. However, we learned to find strength in our unity, our commitment to each other proving resilient in the face of adversity. Months later, as life began to normalize, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Marissa, written from a facility where she was receiving help. She apologized, her words conveying a deep remorse for the terror she inflicted upon our family. She wrote about her loneliness, her envy of what Jenna and I had, and how it had twisted into an obsession. Jenna and I read the letter together, and while it brought some closure, it also opened old wounds. We discussed it long into the night, deciding to accept her apology, not for her sake, but for ours, to release the hold this event had on our lives. Looking back, I realize how fragile our boundaries are, how quickly safety can become vulnerability. But I also recognize the incredible strength that lies in genuine relationships, in the love and commitment that Jenna and I share. That dark chapter is behind us now, but its lessons remain, a stark reminder of the shadows that can lurk behind seemingly normal facades. The storm outside raged relentlessly, the wind howling through the trees and the rain battering against the windows. I sat huddled on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, trying to ignore the eerie feeling that had settled over the house. It was well past midnight, and the darkness outside seemed to press against the windows, creeping into the room like some malevolent force. I had been searching for a handyman to fix the leaky faucet in the kitchen, and after browsing through various options, I stumbled upon an ad on Angie's List that seemed perfect. The ad, which had been posted by someone named Jake the Handyman 0113, promised fast and reliable service at an affordable price. It was exactly what I was looking for, and I wasted no time in reaching out to him. To my surprise, Jake responded almost immediately, his message friendly and professional. We exchanged a few messages, and before long we had arranged for him to come over that evening to fix the faucet. I was relieved that I wouldn't have to wait long for the problem to be fixed, and I eagerly awaited his arrival. As the minutes ticked by, the storm outside seemed to grow worse, and I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over me. I told myself it was just my imagination, that there was nothing to be afraid of. But as the time passed, the feeling only grew stronger. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, and I jumped, nearly spilling my tea. I glanced at the clock. It was well past midnight. Who could be visiting at this hour, in the middle of a storm? Cautiously, I got up from the couch and made my way to the front door. I peered through the peephole, but all I could see was the darkness outside. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Should I open the door? The knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. With a shaky breath, I unlocked the door and pulled it open a crack. Standing on the other side was a man, his face obscured by the falling rain. "Hi, you must be Emily," the man said, his voice friendly. "I'm Jake, the handyman. Sorry for the late hour, but I wanted to come over and fix your faucet as soon as possible." Relief flooded through me, and I smiled, opening the door wider to let him in. "Of course, come on in," I said, stepping aside to let him in. Jake stepped into the house, and I noticed how tall and imposing he was, his dark eyes fixed on me with an intensity that sent a chill to my bones. But I pushed the feeling aside, telling myself I was just being paranoid. We made our way to the kitchen, where the leaky faucet awaited. I showed him the problem, and he nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'll have this fixed in no time," he said, his voice smooth and confident. I watched as he got to work, his movements quick and efficient. But as he worked, the feeling of unease only grew stronger. There was something about him that set off alarm bells in my head, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Suddenly, Jake's phone rang, and he stepped out of the kitchen to take the call. I watched him go, a feeling of dread settling over me like a dark cloud. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that there was nothing to be afraid of, but deep down, I knew that something was very wrong. I glanced around the kitchen, my eyes falling on the large butcher knife lying on the counter. With a surge of panic, I reached for it, holding it tightly in my trembling hands. I told myself it was just a precaution, but deep down I knew that I needed to be prepared for whatever might happen. Suddenly I heard Jake's voice, and I jumped, nearly dropping the knife. He was still on the phone, his voice low and urgent. I strained to hear what he was saying, but his words were muffled by the sound of the storm outside. And then, to my horror, I heard him say my name. With a surge of panic, I realized that something was very wrong. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to get out of there. Had to find a way to escape before it was too late. I turned and ran, the knife clutched tightly in my hand. I could hear Jake behind me, his heavy footsteps echoing in the silence of the house. I reached the front door and flung it open, the cold night air hitting me like a slap in the face. I ran blindly through the darkness, the rain pounding against my skin. I could hear Jake behind me, his voice filled with malice, but I didn't stop running, didn't look back until I was several blocks away, my heart pounding in my chest. I collapsed on the sidewalk, tears streaming down my face. I had narrowly escaped, but I knew that I would never be able to shake the terror of that night. And as I sat there, trembling in the darkness, I became aware that some terrors are far too real, way too close to home. And I knew that I would never be the same again. It was a seemingly inconsequential decision to hire a carpenter from Angie's List to fix issues around the house. The ad boasted top ratings and glowing reviews, so without much thought, I called the number listed. The man answered and promised to come by the next day. His name was Dean. Dean arrived right on time, his tool belt clanking as he sauntered into my home with a confident stride. He was a large man, burly, and with hands that looked like they could crush stone. He smiled a lot, making small talk while he examined things. I remember feeling at ease because of his demeanor. Cheerful, conversational, the kind of guy who seemed to love his job. The repairs didn't take long. Dean worked efficiently, explaining what he was doing as he was doing it. When he finished, he handed me a bill, which I paid without hesitation. He thanked me, his deep voice resonant in the quiet of my suburban home. Before he left, he mentioned offhand how often little things around the house go unnoticed until they break. Like people, he said, and chuckled. I forced a laugh, not quite understanding the joke, but not thinking much of it either. Over the next few days, I noticed small things amiss in my home. A photo frame tilted that I hadn't touched, a kitchen chair slightly out of place. I blamed my cat initially, but when I found my bedroom window unlocked, one I was certain I had locked, I felt a shiver of unease. I returned home from work one overcast and gray afternoon about a week after Dean's visit to find my back door ajar. My heart dropped. I hadn't left it open. I was meticulous about such things. With a deep, steadying breath, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house was silent, the air stale and tense. I walked through each room, my nerves on edge, but found nothing else out of place. I decided to call Dean, wondering if perhaps he had returned for some forgotten tool and accidentally left the door open. The thought was comforting, plausible even. When I reached him, his voice was as jovial as before. "Oh yes, I was checking something with the work I did. Wanted to make sure no problems were starting up again. Hope you don't mind," he explained. I paused, my grip tightening on the phone. I hadn't called him for a follow-up visit. I hadn't reported any problems. A cold wave of realization washed over me as I understood that his reasons didn't add up. "That's strange, Dean. I wish you had called first," I managed to say, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course I apologize. Just looking out for you," he replied, and something in the way he said it made my stomach turn. From then on, I felt watched. I noticed a truck that often seemed parked down the street when I left or returned home, the same model and color as Dean's. Calls to the vendor company went unanswered. The glowing reviews on Angie's List now seemed sinister, as if each one were a lie he had crafted. One afternoon, as I was leaving for a grocery run, I saw him. Dean was standing by his truck, parked a few houses down. He was staring at my house, not doing anything, just standing there. My heart raced, and without thinking, I approached him. "Dean, why are you here?" I demanded, my voice louder than I intended. "Just making sure everything's running smoothly," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "This isn't normal, Dean. You fixed the problems. There's no reason for you to keep checking on things." His expression darkened, the friendly demeanor slipping. "I like to ensure my clients are satisfied," he said slowly, a menacing edge to his voice. I backed away, realizing I had underestimated the situation. "Stay away from my house," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. Dean just watched as I turned and hurried back inside. I called the police, my hands trembling as I explained what had been happening. They agreed to patrol the area and keep an eye on things. That night I couldn't sleep, my mind replaying every encounter with Dean, each one tainted with the new, frightening context of his obsession. Every creak and whisper of the house set me on edge. Then, just past midnight, the sound of shattering glass shattered the oppressive silence. I bolted upright in bed. The moonlight streamed through the broken living room window, glass strewn across the carpet. A dark figure clambered through, large and imposing. It was Dean. Adrenaline surged through me as I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. I spoke in hushed, urgent whispers, reporting a break-in while I locked myself in the bathroom. I could hear him moving around the house, calling out in a sing-song voice, "I just want to make sure everything's okay. You need looking after." Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Dean's footsteps halted and then rapidly retreated. When the police finally arrived, they found me shaken but unharmed. Dean was gone. The following investigation revealed that Dean had no license for home repair, had a history of harassment and stalking. His arrest came a week later in another town, trying to set up his next job. I was safe, but not the same. My home felt violated, a sanctuary no longer. I struggled with the aftermath, the fear and violation of my privacy and safety. But I survived, and with time, support, and a lot of security upgrades, I began to reclaim my peace. Dean's intrusion into my life was terrifying, but it hadn't broken me.